All right, all right, all right, all right, all right. Worldwide movement, peace, love, respect, Big King Sadiq for the Steelers Game Prep Channel. Steelers Nation, let's go. One more again. All right. We're traveling, folks. We're hitting the road, right? We all knew this was coming, but the Steelers are headed to Ireland to take on the Minnesota Vikings in week number 4. So far, the Steelers are 2-1, 2 victories, 1 loss, and they are looking with this game to potentially sort of stabilize things, right? To assert themselves as one of the better teams, at least in the National Football League, if they were able to pull off a win versus the Minnesota Vikings, who, folks, so far have been very impressive indeed. All right, so Pete Gang, we're gonna get right into it, and I took the liberty of doing a little bit of research, right, into both teams on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. Both teams have a pretty good special teams. We, of course, know that the Pittsburgh Steelers are led and head off in their special teams with the NFL's best kicker, right? Boswell certainly has been continued his legacy that he's building for himself. I even had to come up with a little decent little Steelers sort of shout out whenever we see my man take the field and get ready to get us a field goal, no matter where it's at on the field, right? Soon as I see him coming out, or soon as we know it's that time. And certainly when he hits that ball through the uprights, we start pumping it up. Nobody beats the boss. Nobody beats the boss. Nobody beats the boss. True indeed. Great kicker indeed for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And like I said, as far as I've noticed, the Minnesota Vikings are at least on the upper half of the league in special teams as well, as their team is performing actually absolutely very well in most areas, and without question poses the biggest challenge for the Pittsburgh Steelers so far, right? So let's dive in just a little bit and take a look at these stats when the two teams hit the field. So I picked up some tendencies. You know, we always like to take a look at the personnel groupings, right? And so far it's been not exactly what we expected or would have forecasted for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll take a look just last week at their personnel grouping usage, and they went 11 personnel, 17 snaps, which was a little bit under half of their snaps. No, what am I talking about? About a quarter of their snaps, we'll say. They actually started to look a little bit more like what I would have expected when we come to talk about their 12 personnel, which actually was 24 snaps, right? That was actually about 50% of their snaps, maybe even a little over. And they only dipped into 13 personnel for 3 snaps. I personally feel like they are slightly underusing the 13 personnel grouping, or at least not using it to the liking of myself or a lot of other Steeler fans who really want to see Pat Freiermuth, John L. Smith, and Darnell Washington on the field at the same time. I really think it's going to be dynamic and something that they can build on. Maybe that is their thinking, that they'll just gradually let it build as the season progresses. Or maybe it's just that so much of this has been dictated by game circumstance, right? All right. 22 personnel. They didn't even get into that at all last week. Primarily, they lived in 11, 12, and 13. Um, the Minnesota Vikings didn't get into 22 at all last week either. And same amount of snaps at 13 personnel, just three, which is a little under for both of those teams, particularly since they like to run the ball and they have good tight ends. Why not use them? But they were also heavy in 12 personnel as well, though, because they do have two good tight ends with TJ Hawkinson and Josh Oliver. All right. But they were probably heaviest in 13 personnel, but I sort of can understand that. A lot of people say that they probably have a little bit more of a prolific wide receiver group, personnel-wise, than the Pittsburgh Steelers. So they were at 75.2% of their snaps were actually in 11 personnel. Okay. And by the way, last week they blew the Cincinnati Bengals out of the stadium, 48-10, I believe was the score. So, they were very aggressive. All right. Let's look at a few things that are more year to date, right? Season to date, shall we say. Just a few things that have started to accrue and are building or representing a tendency by each team. Okay, so if we go into the motion rate, how many times did each of these teams actually send at least one player in motion? For the Pittsburgh Steelers, that's 48.1%. So a little over 48% of the time they sent a player in motion, which, folks, I will say is a little bit of an uptick from what it was last year and certainly seasons prior. The Minnesota Vikings have been even more shifty, and have actually went into motion 53.6% of the time. All right. Play action rate, 14.2% for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Giving them maybe about a sixth of their plays were in play action at 14.2%. For the Minnesota Vikings, that number is just a little bit higher at 16.3%. The whole purpose of play action is actually to catch the defense at least a little bit off guard. So you don't want to just run play action all the time. Otherwise, it's meaningless. It's like an overused pump fake in basketball, right? It becomes far less potent. So that's actually okay. Good for both teams, I'd say. Air yards per attempt, right? How often is each team actually, or each quarterback for each team actually getting the ball to its targets down the field, actually with the ball in the air, before we're looking at any yak yards or anything that the receiver or eligible can Tomlinism the eligible can can matriculate the ball down the field after receiving it. So air yards. The Pittsburgh Steelers last week were only at 5 yards. So they're not, the way they're running their offense so far, they're not necessarily getting the ball down the field in terms of through the air, but they are, if I'm not mistaken, leading the league in yak yards and yards after catch. So either way, folks, if you're able to get explosive plays, I would say that's what you're looking for. That's the outcome you're looking for. It's just they're getting them in a different way. They're utilizing yak a lot more um, than perhaps other teams in the league. I will say I would like to see that number increase just a smidge, maybe even a little more than a smidge, because you don't want to depend so heavily on making other teams or players, should I say, miss a tackle in order for you to get significant yardage, right? So you do want to have at least a respectable number there. I would like to see that air yards get up around 7 or 8 on average per play. If they could get there, that would be that would, especially with their yak yards, that would really translate into an explosive offensive unit, I think. Conversely, with the Minnesota Vikings, they actually did get over 8 yards in the air at 8.6 yards on average for air yards per attempt. All right. Shotgun rate. How often did each team line its quarterback up in the shotgun? For the Steelers, this might surprise some people, 70.4% of the time. Now, I'm going to say this. I said some people because a lot of other people are not surprised by that. Having a elder statesman quarterback, good way to say it, who does not want to get hit, and certainly, frankly, we don't want to get hit often. They're trying to give him an ability to see the rush coming maybe a little bit better in the shotgun. But we'd like that number, I think, to go down just a bit, and certainly just have the offensive line be more efficient in protecting the quarterback and holding their blocks. So far, the offensive line has not won their blocks at nearly a high enough clip. Okay. Conversely, for the Minnesota Vikings, that number is down to 54.9%. So you see what I mean? I'd like the Steelers actually to get somewhere around there. The no huddle rate. Steelers ran no huddle actually 10.5%, 10.5%, shade under 11% of their of their snaps, which is fine. We don't have to live in no huddle. It does show their willingness to utilize it without any dependency on utilizing it. But they certainly show a very healthy willingness to go into no huddle. Maybe sometimes that's a bit of an advantage for us. We always know that the offense is trying to catch the defense in whatever defense they're set in, and not having much of an ability to do substitutions because they're not huddling up. All right. That's a look at what each team has started to identify itself as early on in the season. Okay. I want to say that for the Pittsburgh Steelers, well, let's talk about quarterback play just a little bit. Aaron Rodgers so far, I think, has exceeded expectations, right? I think that had we actually been able to protect the quarterback effectively, he'd be tearing it up. From what I can see, the ability to throw the ball is certainly not diminished. Anybody who's saying that, folks, is not really, I mean, of course, he doesn't quite have the zip, or, might not quite rifle it to the sideline on and out as incredibly as he previously did, but he's sure still doing it mighty effectively. And really, to me, and he's looked good to me. Just the protection hasn't been there, and the running game is starting to get a little better. We need that to be on an uptick, but yeah, we really have to do a better job in that area. Okay. Let's flip it over real quick for a second and just look at a couple of things along the lines of the defense. What we've seen out of them so far for each team, that is. The Pittsburgh Steelers so far, folks, have an average yards allowed per game of 386 yards. I was hoping for about half that. I don't know about y'all, you understand, but I was hoping for about half that. Especially so far, I was actually looking for the defense to be leading the way early in the season as the offense gains cohesion. I like the rhyme skills, but yeah, that's not the case. It's simply, they have given up far more yards um, than I'm sure they would like to, and any of the fans. So the Minnesota Vikings have actually only given up 291.7 yards per game. A big difference, almost 100 yards less per game. Think about that. They're giving up almost a whole football field less. Folks, we got to get better. As a result of those two figures, you see the Pittsburgh Steelers are coming in at 28th. That's right, folks. Our defense, our vaunted Pittsburgh Steelers defense is coming in at 28th total defense in the league. The Minnesota Vikings is coming in at 6th. Not bad at all. I'd like to see those reverse. Actually, I'm looking by the end of the season for the Steelers to be better than 6th in the league. Plenty of time to turn things around. I'd love to see it start this week. As far as points allowed per game, that's another area I'd like to see the Steelers be much, and expected them to be much better at, but still plenty of time to correct this and get things better. Right now, they are at 24 points allowed per game. Not acceptable, folks. Way too many. We need that around the 10 to 14 range, quite frankly. To satisfy my expectations, they'd be healthy and looking robust, right, as a defense, if they at least got it down around 16, 17. But 24, nah, way too much. And the Minnesota Vikings illustrate what I'm saying as they come in at just giving up 18.7 yards per game. And even that, I'm sure they'd like to see improved on, but not too bad. The Steelers, come on, D. Hey, listen, there's a lot of new players on this defense, right? A lot of moving parts, as they would say. A lot of transition from last year to this year, player-wise, in defense. So we've got to be patient and allow for some time for the cohesion. Like I say, folks, hopefully we can start to see some of that this week in Ireland versus the Minnesota Vikings. All right. All right, just to close out real quick, our look at the defenses. The Pittsburgh Steelers have managed 3 interceptions so far, which I think is around, it's actually right around middle of the pack, maybe just slightly teetering into the upper half of the league in the middle, because it's early, folks. You know, I think the leader in the league has like 8 or 9 picks or something like that. It's early in the year. Okay, so 3 for the Steelers, and the Minnesota Vikings have 2 interceptions. Pittsburgh Steelers, 3 interceptions. Minnesota Vikings, 2 interceptions. The Pittsburgh Steelers not anywhere near where they need or want to be on sacks, but with last week's performance, they did at least get themselves up to 12 sacks on the year. So that's in the upper half for sure, but still a long ways to go. The Minnesota Vikings only at 5 sacks. So they're not really getting a lot of heat on the quarterback. That's something the Pittsburgh Steelers may want to try and take advantage of. Hopefully that bodes well for our protection holding up for Aaron Rodgers this week. All right, folks. The Steelers did get quite a few forced fumbles last week, too. So keep an eye on that. All right. Man, this is an exciting matchup. Like I said, a real challenge. Definitely, I'd have to say, at least on paper, the best challenge. Not on paper. What we've seen so far, Minnesota's been really impressive. So this is the biggest challenge for the Steelers so far this season, is what I'm trying to say, folks. And hopefully the Pittsburgh Steelers rise to the challenge this week versus the Minnesota Vikings over there in Dublin, Ireland, right? Let's not forget that the late Mr. Rooney was indeed at one point the presidential ambassador to Ireland. And certainly that has a lot to do with this game being established. This game is actually considered to be a home game for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I think that they do have a pretty strong following in Ireland. Let's see if they can come out and root the Steelers on to a victory. All right, folks, week number 4. Like I said, the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Minnesota Vikings. Big challenge, big game. Let's see what they can do this week. This is Big King Sadiq for Steelers Game Prep Channel. One more again. We're looking to see a strong push, Steelers Nation 2025. All right, folks. Thank you. Big King Sadiq for the Steelers Game Prep Channel. Steelers Nation, ride with me. I'm out.